Hi, hello, vanakkam, and welcome to Little Sly YouTube channel. And in this video, we are going to see about another interesting plugin, which is the Flexible File Writer. So before we move on to the video, this is me, Vasan Shanmugam. Please do subscribe to our channel. If you have not subscribed yet, like, comment, and question your feedback in the comment section. So with no further delay, let's go and see what is a flexible file writer. So let's open the flexible file writer in here. Let's see that plugin. So we have the flexible file writer here, and to download and install it, we have two options we have already seen in here in our previous video. So just download the file and then copy paste the jar and the lib files in the particular location, or we have another option. Go to the options and plugins manager and search for the flexible file writer, which we already installed in here. So we can find it in the uninstalled plugins, and once we install them, just apply changes and restart JMeter to see that in effect. So now let's see what is a flexible file writer. So before that, let us add the file writer in here. So let's go to the synchronization example and let's add the listener. So we have added the listener here. So JMeter has very simple test results writing capabilities using simple data writer plugin. So then why do we need a flexible file writer? What is the purpose of using it? So this flexible file writer has a flexibility of writing the files in various different formats. Say for example, we can write it from a text, we can write it as an XML, we can write it as a CSV file in any order which we require. But this is one of the restrictions which we have with simple data writer, because the file formats are restricted to just an XML and CSV. So we do not find this simple data writer fit for our task. So that is the reason we have come up with the flexible file writer, and this flexible file writer plugin allows writing test results in flexible format that we can specify in here. So any format that we give here, we can get the files in that format. And then we have different file headers. So here we can see the end time millis in here, and then we have the response time. So these are the variables which we are going to read from the test as the result for each of these transactions, and here is the record each sample. So these are the values. So under this end time milliseconds, we get this end time milliseconds, and then under the response time, we get the response time. Under the latency, we get the latency. Under the sent bytes, we get the sent bytes. And under the successful, the received bytes, we get the received bytes. If it is successful, then it is getting displayed under this is successful, and the response code is either 200 or 404. So whatever is the response code, and here is the header. So this is the header, which is for any table or for any rows, we have the headers, and then we have the footer. So here we can give it as end of result. So this will end, or this will be the last line in the result section. So this record specification where we see here, so this is where we define a value, or if we want to add the end time, or if we want to add is failed. So we can add these values in the record each sample, and under that we can get the results. But before that, we have to make sure that they are properly placed in this header value. So we have various different fields. So we can see here that for the end time, so when at which time does the request has ended, and the same way the end time millis, so the same as end time, but it has been divided by 1000. So since it is given in seconds, so when we wanted to display it in milliseconds, we are dividing the value by 1000. And then we have this is failed, which tells us that if the response was marked as failed, and then is successful, that if the response is marked as successful, then we get that is response as successful. And then we have the latency. So this latency tells us the time to first response byte received. If it is available, we get this latency, and then we get the latency in the micro, which is in the milliseconds by divided by 1000. and then we get the connect time. So this connect time tells us the time to establish the connection, and then we have the received bytes, which tells us the number of request bytes received, and then we have the request data, which tells us the request data from the sample. So whatever data that we request from the sample, we can see it in this place. And then we have the response code, where the response code, so we have seen earlier that there are different response code for each of the responses. If it is a valid response code, then we get it as 200, and if it is a page not found, then we get it as 404. And then the response data, so we can get the response data under this column. And then we have the response headers. So the response headers, if present, we can get it in the response headers. And then the response message, so it can be either okay or not found, so any of the response messages will be displayed here. And then we have the response file name, so the response file name will be displayed here. And then the response header size, so the size of the response header will be displayed under this category. And then we have the size of response body, which is response size. And then we have the response time, so the time to respond, for the full response to get loaded. And then the same is displayed in milliseconds. And then we have this sample label, so name of the sampler that has made the request is displayed under this column. And then we have the sent bytes, which is the number of bytes that is sent. And then the start time, so it tells that when does the request has started, and then that is displayed in milliseconds. And then we have the thread name, so here we have two thread, one is thread group 1 and one is thread group 2, so we can get each of them in here. And then the number of active threads in all groups, we can get it in threads count. And then the group thread, that is then group threads, which is the number of active threads in this thread group, in each thread group. And then the sample count, which is the number of samples that we sent during the test. And then the error count, which is the number of errors. And then the sample URL, which we use for testing. So all these fields can be displayed in here, but here for this as a default, so when we get this flexible file data, so as a default we get these values, which is the end time, the response time, latency, sent and received bytes, and the successful response code. So let's now add the start time. So here we could see the start time here, so let's add that start time first. So let's add start time in here, and let's give some space. And once you add that, so this is the very important place, so here we have to add the value or add the record. So let's add the start time here with the same name, and then we have to copy this straight line, a /t, and a straight line to give a space, so this will differentiate the values. And now we have to extract it to a particular folder. So I have a folder here, I have already created a folder, I'm just copy pasting this folder, and so under this folder, and this is the file name which we are going to extract. So let's now run a test. So what we have made a change is we have added the start time, so in fact we can add every value of this, every field of this, but for now to start with, so let's add this value and let's run the test. And the test has completed, and let's now go to the folder and let's open this file. So here we can see, so this is the start time and this is the end time, so we have not changed it. So this is the start time and this is the end time, the response times, this is the latency, this is the sent bytes, received bytes is successful, yes, all are successful, there is no failures, and the response codes are 200 and 301 since they were redirect. And finally the footer, which is the end of results. So let's now make some changes. So let's now remove this end time millis to end time, and the next one is, let us change this format to CSV, and we'll change the file name to 01, and let's see whether we can add any other files in here, any other count in here. So let's try to add this URL. So we'll add the URL here, before that, let us reduce the times. So we have added the URL, and here let's add the URL so that they will be displayed. For that, we need to add this one before we enter the URL. So let's add the URL here, and let's now run the test and see how does it work. So now let's run the test. The test has completed execution, and let's now open the folder, and here we can see the value, the file has been displayed in CSV. So let's open the file and see how does it work. And here we can see the values are displayed, and for seeing the values separately we have to make it to columns. We can see the start time, the end time, the response times, so in case if we want to have a distribution, so here we can see when we click on the value, so here we can see the spaces in it. So here we can see the latency, here we can see the sent bytes, the successful, and every other values, and even we could see the URLs for each of these requests. So this is how this flexible file writer works. So let's now try with few more other formats. So let's try with XLS, and let's see how does it work. XLSX with the other file section. So here in fact we can add this as the delimiter, so that when we want to convert the values to columns, it will be easy for us to break the values. So let me make that change in here. So now let's run the test again and see how does it work. So I'm running the test again. The test is completed, and let's now open the file. Okay, and now we have got it. So since we have added the space in it, so we were able to break the values into each columns now, and in fact we can even break these values here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to data text to columns, and then the delimiter is others, and let me break it. Next, yes, so now we can see very clearly, and this actually helps us to understand more about the end time, the response times of each of the transactions, the latency, the sent bytes for each of the requests, and what is the status, whether it is successful or a failure, and the response codes for each of them, and what is the URL that is being used. So each and every field can be easily identified, and that is the advantage of using this flexible file writer. So I think this video would have been very useful to you, and I believe you use this file writer in your testing and in your day-to-day activities. So with this we come to an end, and I believe this video would have been very useful to you. Until we meet you in another interesting video, it's bye from Vasan Shanmugam and Little's Law.